Hi, welcome to week 8. Week 8 is all about the big ideas associated with the nervous system. And anatomically, um, your nervous system is divided into the central nervous system, and in this slide you see peripheral nervous system. Now I'm going to recommend that you look at this video by Hank, and I'll give you the link. One of the things that can help you is this. He builds in this video a diagram of the organization of the nervous system. So we have the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord, and we have the peripheral nervous system, and he builds all of this here, which is the cranial and spinal nerves that go out to the other parts of your body. Your nervous system is unique. There are cells we want to talk about, neurons and other supporting cells called neuroglia, or neuroglia is the way it's spelled, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The other video is by Mr. Anderson, and Mr. Anderson and Hank both talk about, in their video, the physiology of nervous transmission, or otherwise known as action potential, which requires the electrolytes to be in homeostatic concentrations in your body. Now, one of the things that is a pet peeve of mine is that even in your book, everybody talks about nervous impulse as being like an electrical impulse, and it is not electricity. It just isn't. We measure it with electrical instruments. We measure a voltage difference between the inside and outside of a cell membrane, especially the membrane of a muscle cell that we talked about last week, or a neuron, a nerve cell. The neuron is the functional cell, and it is extremely important that we have electrolytes in balance, where their concentration outside is much higher than inside the cell. And what's outside of the cell? It's interstitial fluid, generally. Now, we normally think of blood as supplying all the stuff to our cells, but that's really not quite true. The blood supplies nutrients and oxygen and removes wastes, carbon dioxide and other wastes. And it does so in unique ways, and you're going to learn about that in ANP2 when you talk about when you read about and learn about the circulatory system. I just want to mention here that all of the cells in your body are bathed by a fluid that is outside of the circulatory system, or the cardiovascular system. Is actually a part of the circulatory system, I say, because it all circulates. But that fluid, generally in your body, is called interstitial fluid, and you've all seen it because you've all had blisters, and that white liquid or that clear liquid in your blister is interstitial fluid. But in your brain is surrounded by cerebral spinal fluid. Your joints are surrounded by or encapsulated in synovial sacs, synovial fluid. And so you have these fluids, but where do they come from? Well, they come from leaky capillaries. They are plasma that leaks out of capillaries, and then that plasma delivers the nutrients to the cells, and it also carries the wastes away. Now, in the brain, one of the things that happens is that the cerebral spinal fluid does circulate. It leaves the cardiovascular system from capillaries in the ventricles of the brain, and it circulates down through the spinal cord and back up, and then it's picked up again to carry the wastes away by veins in one of the membranes that surround the brain. The brain is surrounded by duramater, putameter, and arachnoid membrane. These are veins in the arachnoid membrane that pick up the waste. Now, Paul Anderson and Hank don't talk about that aspect, but it's an extremely important aspect, and there's another video that I'm going to give you a link to by Jeff Lift, and this is a video That's a TED Talk. You can find it by looking under TEDx. One more reason why you need a good night's sleep. Or you can find it on YouTube also if you search properly for it. Jeff Lift is going to explain to you an interesting phenomenon, which is that the circulation of cerebral spinal fluid that removes waste from your brain happens only at night when you sleep, or only when you sleep. Not necessarily at night, but only when you sleep. And if you deprive yourself of sleep, your brain starts to fill up with toxic wastes from its own activity. And if that goes on long enough, you can die. In fact, one of the interesting many research projects were done by Germans before World War II, and they couldn't understand. They wanted to know what would happen if you were deprived of sleep, and they found that people got very sick. More recently, there is another video that I'll give you a link to. It's about Peter Tripp. Peter Tripp was I think it was New York or Chicago, I can't remember, but it'll tell you. He was a disc jockey and decided to do a stunt on air where he was continuously broadcasting and went without sleep for over 7 days. And at the end, he got really weird. And after this was over, he ended up sick. His personality changed. His wife divorced him, and he died young. And this is all attributed to the lack of sleep that he forced himself to do to try to set a record. Very dangerous to do. In fact, I had an incident this year. I was working so many hours this summer, and I was inspecting corn, and I have to do it on a schedule. So late one evening, I went out to inspect corn. Late in the afternoon, about 5, 6 o'clock, and it was just a quickie. But on the way home, when I came to an intersection, I fell asleep at about that moment. And I crossed the intersection, which was a T, and I woke up in the cornfield. Now, fortunately, I was very lucky. I didn't hit anything. There was no fence, and I didn't hurt my car, and I didn't get hurt myself, and it scared me. It really did. So I couldn't control it. Even though I was less than a mile from the house, I couldn't keep from blacking out. I had gone too many hours without sleep. I do that too often. I started at midnight that day, and at 7 p.m., I was still going strong, maybe not so strong. Pretty bad stuff. So these are 3 videos that you should watch so that you can get an idea about the organization of the nervous system and some of the anatomy. Let's talk a minute about the neuroglia or the neuroglia. One of the things these videos don't do is explain that there are 3 types of axons in your brain, or in your body, really. In your brain, you'll hear Sherlock Holmes talking about gray matter, and also talking about white matter. Well, in your brain, the gray matter actually is neurons and neuroglia that do not have any insulation on them. So, you know, I know that in these videos they talk about this as electricity, but it's not really electricity. Because if it was electricity, it would be the flow of electrons. And what happens to generate an action potential is that these ions that are at high densities outside just flow in through the membrane of the cell and change the polarity, the relative charges outside and inside the cell. So at resting state, you have a very high level of positive sodium ions outside of the cell. And when a nerve is stimulated, and what stimulates a nerve? A thought, smell, touch, right? Heat, cold, sound. So we have 5 basic senses, And we have sensory nerve endings in our body that can pick up these smells, and sounds, and touches, and feelings of heat, cold, so forth. And that depolarizes, that causes gated channels to open that allow the high concentration ions outside in the interstitial fluid to flow rapidly in. There's no energy involved. The energy that's involved is in repolarization, or reversing that by pumping those ions back out at that location where they went in. That stimulus starts the next location to do the same thing, and as that then repolarizes the next spot on the membrane, depolarizes, and so this wave of change of charge. Now there's a positive charge outside and a positive charge inside at resting state. It's just that the positive charge outside is a lot more positive because there's a lot more ions outside than inside. So we tend to represent that as a change in positive to negative when it's not. It's just a change of positive to less positive outside, and a change inside from positive or less positive to a lot more positive when it's depolarized, and then that's reversed through a sodium-potassium pump. It's actually potassium runs out, sodium runs in, and then there are other ions that are very important too. And what's the issue here? Well, from a health standpoint and a practical standpoint, when you are sweating and you are playing sports and you're in the hot sun, what happens if you get dehydrated? If you get dehydrated, your nervous system doesn't work very well. A lot of things don't work very well because the enzymes can change that are proteins that create, that regulate the rates of reaction in your body. But and so we use Gatorade and not just water to rehydrate. Hopefully we use some kind of electrolyte solution so that we can get these electrolytes restored to homeostatic levels. Because what's one of the first symptoms of dehydration? Cramps. And another symptom is being befuddled. Your mind doesn't work so well. Your mind doesn't work so well. So in the next video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the neuroglia in the brain. I'll save that for that. And some of the other aspects of nervous tissue and why it's special, and what biomedical research is trying to do to learn how to stimulate nerves to regenerate. Okay, so we'll see you with the next video. Thanks.